Hey everybody, welcome back to the Skeptic Fence Show. Tonight's guest is Dr. GAD SAAD. GAD, how are you doing this evening?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's great. It's great to have you, man. I've been a fan of yours now for, I'll be honest with you, about 6 months now. I didn't follow you from the beginning, but you're making some headways, man, when it comes to social media. And I call you a fresh breath of intelligence on social media. So it's really awesome, man. It's really
Thank you.
awesome to
Those
have
are
you on the
very
show
sweet
tonight.
words. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. I have an image I have to show you, and it's by Crush Endo. He made a promotion image tonight for the show, and here it is right here. I thought it was awesome. It says, "May the fence be with you." Skepticfence.com.
I love it. I love it.
It is awesome, isn't it, though?
Awesome.
Yeah,
Flattering.
that guy's really cool.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And it's really good Photoshop, by the way. He did a really good job on it.
Well, I didn't mean that guy meaning me. I meant the guy who who,
Oh,
who
the
created
Oh,
kid.
the
the
guy
art.
did it. Yeah. Fuck it. Both of you are all right in my book.
Real quick, I got a bio that I would like to state here. Dr. Gad Saad, professor and author of The Evolutionary Basis of Consumption and Consumer Instinct. Gad is an evolutionary behavioral scientist at the John Molson School of Business, who is known for applying evolutionary psychology to marketing and consumer behavior. He holds a Concordian University, hopefully I pronounced it right, research chair in evolutionary behavioral sciences and Darwinian consumption 2008 to 2018, and has a blog at Psychology Today. Did I get that right? Is there anything you would like to add?
Beautiful. That sounds good. That's enough.
Awesome. Before we get on with the show here with our rational discourse, I should say, I love your YouTube videos. And if anybody wants to subscribe to GadSad on his social media and YouTube, links down below. If you're watching Vaughn Live TV, it's right there down below. Before we get on, I love your videos on YouTube, but the one I really enjoy is your Asan Yuger Decoder 5000. Could you tell us a little bit before we get on with the show here? Could you tell us a
Yes.
little bit how you
Yeah.
came
Go ahead.
up with it and maybe a couple examples?
Well, basically, the idea is that I kept seeing these guys coming up with all sorts of nonsensical interpretations of different realities, right? So they had this incredible, uncanny ability to come up with all sorts of gibberish. And so I thought, how can I satirize that? And so we were coming home one day from the cafe, my wife and I asked her, "Hey, do you have any of our children's, fake cell phones, toys?" She said, "Yeah." Well, why are you asking? I said, "Oh, I have an idea for a sad truth clip," and that's how it started. So I thought, I will pretend as though I was walking somewhere and walked into a store and I found this mysterious decoder called the Aslan Yuger Decoder 5000, and I actually showed, to make the satire even that more poignant, I showed the clearly fake cell phone toy. And the way it basically works is you input anything you want. So, for example, you say 9/11 terrorist attack, and then the decoder tells you what the right, decoding is. So that would be, for example, evil Jews, or you would say Armenian genocide, and it would say Israel occupation. And so you just
Oh, beautiful.
so that was really good because satire is a very powerful tool to
Oh, yeah.
shed light on buffoonery. So yeah, it's gone really well.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it, man. It's awesome. I laughed at the first one. You just made a follow up on it. And I was just like, oh, what was it? The FBI statistics or something like that. I was just like,
Yeah,
man,
so
that's
that one
funny.
basically, well, that one is, if you'd like, I discovered some new capabilities of the decoders. Not only does it work in terms of entering words, but you could enter photos, and then it tells you what the real photo is. So I used the FBI most wanted terrorists list, and basically what I did, instead of each of those photos of those guys, it basically generated a photo of Woody Allen for all the terrorists. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry about that. Yes,
Okay, okay.
That
I
was
was
a good
muted there
one
for a
too.
second. That was a good one. I really enjoyed that one too.
We all tend to mute ourselves while the guest
Oh,
is
Yeah,
speaking.
so there's
So
no
if
feedback.
there is a pause after a joke, it's not that you're not funny, or maybe it is, but sometimes we're laughing.
yeah, because I can't. What's happening is there's kind of a bit of a delay,
Little
so I
delay.
don't know if I'm losing you or not. Okay,
Now you're
good.
good. You're nice and clear. So,
You
uh,
might lose Cock though. He has a, or sorry, Coctopus. He has a toaster he uses for internet connection.
yeah,
That's me,
that's what we.
TJ.
That's
I
all
have
jokes,
a
though.
tendency to really love toast, and my internet does not agree with my toaster.
Got it.
All right, next question I have is now, since our show here mainly pertains to religion and politics, I'd like for our viewers that might not know who Gadsad is, the Gadfather, to get to know him. So give us a brief description on your religious upbringing, what you claim to be now, if any affiliation,
Right.
and your past and or current political adherence.
Right. So I was born in Beirut, Lebanon. Uh, 1964, so I'm actually 50 years old. Nice half-century mark.
Yeah.
Lived there till I was 11, at which time we had to escape Lebanon because of the brutality of the civil war. We're Lebanese Jews. We were part of the last group of Jews that were in Lebanon. So if you imagine the general dynamics in the region, it became increasingly more precarious to be Jewish in Arab lands this past century. And so we were part of the last bastion of Jews, a few thousands that had remained, even maybe less than that. And then by the time the Civil War broke out, it was simply impossible to stay there. And so we left under, imminent threat of execution. And then we emigrated to Canada in late 1975. My parents then kept going back and forth from Montreal to Beirut after we had emigrated to Canada. And then in 1980, they were kidnapped by some really nasty folks, Fatah, group Abu Nidal. And as you might imagine, typically when kidnappings happen, you could pretty much guarantee that the kidnappees are going to end up dead. But through some various networks that we had, we were able to release them. I think they spent about 8 days in captivity. I was a young guy. I was 14, 15 at the time. And then after that, none of us ever went back. So the last ones that had ever gone to Lebanon were my parents in 1980, and none has ever been back since.
Wow. Wow, unbelievable. What about your religious upbringing, affiliation, if any, now? Or
So we're, as I said, we're Jewish, by religious heritage, and so we grew up. I grew up in a traditional, religious, not religious, but conservative Jewish home. Now, what that basically means is that we certainly did all of the high holidays and so on. There was always a tension between sort of modernity in Lebanon, because Lebanon, in the context of the Middle East, was certainly a lot more progressive than some of the other countries. And so while we adhered to our religious identity, we were also quite modern. Now, in my case, from as far back as I can remember, I had problems with religion. I would always ask questions, even as a young boy. Why do we have to stand up now in the synagogue, Dad? Why do we have to go to the left? Why do we have to dance to the right? And usually sort of the answer was always, just shut up and do, right? Don't question.
Yep.
And so from a very, very young age, I felt quite suspicious of religion. And so, eventually as I grew up and learned more, I always identified as very Jewish in terms of all of the facets that are incorporated within Judaism, short of the religious narrative. A lot of people say, well, how could you be Jewish and an atheist, right? I consider myself an atheist, as many of your viewers might already know. So how could you be Jewish and an atheist? Well, some of the most famous Jews of all time would all fit under the appellation of atheist Jews, and that Judaism, to be Jewish, incorporates a racial element, a shared history, a shared genetic lineage. So there's all sorts of elements that constitute you being Jewish beyond whether you believe in the religious narrative. And so in that sense, I'm both Jewish and a avowed atheist.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. Actually, I did not know that about you, but Cockpuss lost connection here. He's back. There we go. Next question I have 2 more questions. I'll pass you on to TJ, Drew, then Paul.
Sure.
Next question here is, now the field of psychology that you study is evolutionary psychology to market and consumer behavior.
Right.
Now, for people out there that may not know what that is, could you please explain what that means, and also include maybe a couple examples of your previous or current works?
Sure, absolutely. So basically the idea is that most social scientists in general, and certainly consumer psychologists in particular, have traditionally ignored the fact that we have a biological heritage, that we are, in the same way that all sorts of animals are studied, all animals are studied while taking into account their evolutionary history. Somehow when it comes to humans, cultural anthropologists and social psychologists and all sorts of economists can study humans without ever recognizing the biological forces that shape who they are and what they do. And so close to 2 decades ago, I founded the field of evolutionary consumption, which is basically the idea that to truly study our consumatory nature, we have to study the biological forces that shape who we are. And so it is a mix, it's a marriage of evolutionary psychology as applied to consumer behavior. And I define consumer behavior very, very broadly. It's not just consumption of Diet Coke and wearing of jeans and Starbucks, but we consume religious narratives, we consume cultural products, we consume friendships. And so I define consumption with a capital C. And what I basically argue in my work, and I'll give you a few examples in a second, is that, sure, of course, consumers learn to be consumers. Yes, socialization shapes them. Yes, their culture and their environment shapes them. Nobody is denying that. But you also can't deny that there are certain things that make the Japanese consumer and the Jamaican consumer and the Israeli consumer very similar to each other, precisely because they share this biological heritage. And so to give you one or two examples that some of your viewers might have heard me speak of in the past, and I can maybe give some additional ones. I did a study with one of my former doctoral students where I looked at how a woman's menstrual cycle affects her consumer behavior. So depending on where a woman is in her cycle, is she in the fertile phase, is she ovulating or not, will affect all sorts of things that she does as a consumer. One of which, I'll just mention one for the purposes of the show, how she beautifies herself. Does she wear sexy clothes or not? Does she wear makeup or not? Does she wear high heels or not? All turned out to be very, very correlated to her ovulatory cycle. And as you might expect, when she is maximally fertile, when she is ovulating, this is where she is most likely to engage in beautification. This is when she's most likely to dress in a sexy way. Very much like how females of other species do, right? When they are in estrus, when they are in heat, they have certain signals, either olfactory signals or their genitalia engorge, precisely to signal that they are in estrus. Well, human females don't quite do it as obvious in a manner, but they do it through certain consumer choices. So that would be an example applying these ideas to women consumers. Taking it to men consumers, I did another study also on hormones where I looked at what happened. This is with another graduate student, where we looked at what happens to men's testosterone levels if you have them drive either a fancy Porsche and also have them drive a beaten up old sedan. And we then take salivary assays to measure their testosterone levels. And as you might imagine, it's a form of peacocking when you put a guy in a Porsche, right? So he gets an instantaneous social win. And so his endocrinological system explodes, his testosterone levels shoot through the roof. So these are two examples that I always like to give as good examples, because it demonstrates how not everything could be studied through the lens of socialization and culture and learning, because these are very basal physiological phenomena.
I find this very interesting, your studies and stuff like that. I'm like new to this, so I find it intriguing and very interesting. But Paul, I think you have something to say real quick.
It is intriguing, very interesting, but I don't know. It sounds very suspicious. Sounds like I don't know. They're all cultural concepts and cultural constructions, and that's what gender really is. There, God.
Okay, you're joking, right?
Yeah, of course.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, geez, you scared me. Because I'm trying to be restrained here, and I said, "Oh, geez, I already don't like this guy." But apparently, you're joking. So you're back in my good books.
Oh shit! No, he's a ginger. Good. We all don't like him.
Yeah.
My next question here, and I'll pass you off to TJ here, and I think it's a question, a topic we really need to discuss and have more people discuss is. Here on the show, we've been talking a lot about Islam lately and how damaging it is, not only with the terrorist acts and atrocities, but especially when it comes to freedom of speech and the oppression of women, gays, and so on. In the past, we have discussed the stats on terrorism, who I believe commit 95+% of the terrorist attacks, atrocities throughout the world, Islamic extremists, jihadists, stuff like that. But why do you think the regressives and the Muslim apologists out there are so afraid to speak the truth about Islam, including the damage it has done and is currently doing on a daily basis? I believe it's not the religion of peace. I feel we need to talk more about Islam, including Muslims joining in on the discussion on the reformation of the faith. What do you think?
Right. Yeah, so there are several reasons for that. Let me just touch on a few. One is that many so-called liberals, which I very much like the fact that they're no longer being called liberals, and I love the fact that the term regressives and regressive left has really
regressive
picked up.
Leftist, yeah.
Yes, that's a wonderful term.
Yes.
I think it's because they conflate the criticism of an ideology, in this case a religious ideology called Islam, with bigotry and racism or intolerance towards a people, because they wrongly assume that that religion is for of those poor, brown, marginalized people, right?
Yeah.
Now, of course, that's laughable because, as we all know, Islam is not a race; it's an ideology. There are people
Correct.
of all possible races that consider themselves Muslim. There are Asian people, there are black people, there are white people, there are brown people. But reflexively, I think, and in a lazily manner, many people who consider themselves liberal simply can't bring themselves to criticize this religion. So it's perfectly progressive, it's perfectly liberal to criticize 9,999 other religions, and certainly to criticize Christianity.
Oh yeah.
Makes you a hero in terms of being progressive. But the reflex is just don't do it when it comes to Islam. And I'll give you a quick example of that, and then I'll give you some other reasons for this reticence. A while ago, I had put up a clip of a Iraqi astronomer who was being interviewed on some show in Arabic. Now, this is an astronomer, right, a scientist, who was saying, well, no, I mean, the Quran says that the earth is flat, and here's why it's flat, and so on. This wasn't a Saturday Night Live clip. This guy was fully serious, right? He was fully committed to the tenets in his holy book. So I put up this clip without any editing, without any editorializing. I didn't interpret anything, just to kind of show how poisonous or how parasitic religion can be to an otherwise very intelligent person. And I've done that with Christian examples, with Jewish examples, and usually there people are willing to jump on the bandwagon and say, oh, what a buffoon, what an idiot.
Yep.
In this case, because it was an Iraqi Muslim astronomer, almost, of course, nobody said anything. And the one person who was very upset by my posting, this was a scientist, a fellow evolutionary scientist, a woman from Northern California, who basically wrote on my thread, why are you doing this? I mean, why are you criticizing these people? Don't you think they're enough marginalized? She was very, very upset that I would have the audacity to post this. Now, so step back and think for a second, right?
Oh yeah.
This scientist was not upset that this guy was spewing some of the most laughable, outlandish things. That's not what offended her. What offended her was that I would point to his buffoonery. And so that perfectly captures this reticence. The other reason I would say, to answer your original question of, why the regressives can't do it, it's because moral and cultural relativism has so parasitized their brains, right?
Yes.
So this is right. There are no absolute moral truths. Everything is relative. And so if in some culture they decide they want to cut off the clitorises of women, who are we to judge them? If we judge them, we are racist, bigoted, and intolerant. And they've bought into that narrative, and therefore they become completely paralyzed when facing that ideology.
It's amazing. And also, I love when regressives, I love that, regressive leftists.
Yeah.
It's like also awesome. But I love when they use the word Islamophobia as it's like, it's, I see Islam as being a rational fear, depending on where you live. It's a rational fear. It's not an irrational fear. So, and I love with what's his name? Majid Nawaz, right?
Majid Nawaz.
I can't pronounce that, but I like how he says, Islamophobia, it's a nonsensical word, so let's call it anti-Islam bigotry. It's like,
yes.
It's like amazing. So I got some viewer submissions, but I'll do that at the end of the interview. Let me pass you over to TJ, then Drew, and Paul. Go ahead, TJ.
All right, it's great to have you, and tell me if I don't want that like Americans say it this way thing. Tell me if I'm saying it right. GAD SAAD.
So let me say it. Not quite, because you sound as though you're about to throw up.
No, it's because I've heard you explain it as a more guttural sound.
So here it goes. So it's GAD, right? It's
God.
not GAD. It's not God. It's GAD.
GAD.
And it's SAAD.
SAAD.
That's pretty
GAD
good.
SAAD.
SAAD. It's a ayin.
I lived in Saudi Arabia for a while. I know your people.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. How long did you live there for?
Oh, God. It was when I was way younger, maybe 4 years between the ages of 4 and 8 or something like that.
So you don't remember much.
Lived in a compound. We were Americans. We had to live in a compound and shit. But I've been cultured. I know your people. And I've got to clear up a couple of rumors that I heard. Is it first of all, I'm known for asking the really hard-hitting questions here.
Okay, shoot.
You got to brace yourself
Was
because
I a porn star before I became a professor?
no,
Yes.
no, this one I think rings a little more true than that. Is it true that you were the chubby bearded Baldwin brother that is finally looking to catch his own fame?
Oh,
Why did you have to go with the chubby part? I mean,
Well,
that's. I feel offended. I need a safe space. There was
don't
no
worry.
trigger warning. What's
Oh,
going on?
no trigger warning. You got to do the trigger warning,
You and
TJ.
Drew are going to get along fantastically.
Oh yeah.
No, but seriously, you do have like kind of that Baldwin eyes and eyebrows, and I find it attractive. I like looking at you on camera, and I'm not gay in any way.
Well, thank you.
God
You know,
dang.
I'm sorry. I told my wife that, once in a while I go to some of these, after I do a show. I mean, I try not to sit there and read all the comments, but once in a while I'll jump in, and some of the comments are so lovely that it's difficult to stay humble with all the
Oh,
lovely
yeah.
words I hear. So thank you for the lovely words. I
Well,
appreciate it.
definitely. All right. Well, I hope you keep that in mind while I ask my next hard-hitting
Uh-oh.
question. We'll move on to something a little more serious.
Okay.
How long exactly did you wait before you came out as a lesbianese?
Yes, very good.
But,
I've
I mean,
actually seen a
is it
similar
hard-
joke.
Is it harder being like Jewish when you're lesbianese?
No, but are you being serious about Lebanese, or
No,
are you
no.
doing the lesbian thing?
I've got to get this out of the way. I do it to every guest. It's kind of like an inside joke for all of us.
Very
Got
good.
to get out of the-
Yes.
I'll actually, I'm going to kind of change topics on you because I know that I've researched a little bit on what you actually, your field of study.
Yes.
And so I have an actual question. Do you have any phobias? And what do you think is the strangest and maybe evolutionary least beneficial phobia that you know of?
Wow, very good question.
It is a
So
good
I'll
question.
answer as relating to me. I have a huge phobia when it comes to mosquitoes. Yeah, Darwin bless my wife for having put up with me for 16 years, and I say this because if we're ever traveling somewhere, or even if we're in our home and there's a mosquito in the house, nobody is going to sleep in that house until we've caught the damn mosquito. I'm literally terrified. I am so disgusted and repulsed by mosquitoes. Now, some people might say, well, I mean, how could that be? I mean, why are you so afraid of mosquitoes? But meanwhile, I've gone to wolf sanctuaries where I've walked in among, adult wolves with zero fear, right? Well, I actually argue, because you asked about, adaptive and evolutionary, I actually argue that my phobia is the perfectly most adaptive one, because if you look at the epidemiology of, the most dangerous animal that humans have ever known, it's by far, I mean, by several hundred, if not thousand, order of magnitude greater for mosquitoes, right? I mean, something like, I hope I'm not getting this wrong, somebody could check the facts, but I think something like 20% of afflictions within the World Health Organization in one form or another relate to the mosquito. So I think that my fear is actually very adaptive. So we could call it a phobia, but it's certainly an adaptive phobia.
I can
hate
agree with
spiders.
that. I definitely,
spiders.
but there are other, I guess, adaptive phobias that are more instilled, like with sharks. I've even read the stories where they said that even hearing the word shark alone raises people's heart rates and instills fear in them.
Right.
And there are, of course, irrational, like we have no problem driving around and we have much more of a chance of dying from that.
Yeah.
We would from flying, but people have an irrational fear of flying. They think it's much more dangerous when, of course, it's not. But did you have like a crazy phobia that you've heard of someone else having that could in no way be beneficial evolutionarily?
Yes, I'm trying to think of one that wouldn't somehow map onto some adaptive explanation. I can't think off the top of my head, but I mean, since we're on this general topic, I'll give you one example, but that does have adaptive roots. So if you look at OCD, right, obsessive compulsive disorder, there's a very interesting way that you could look at this disorder from an evolutionary perspective. And basically the argument is the following. We've evolved to scan for environmental threats. That's perfect, right? I mean, make sure that your hands are not contaminated with germs, make sure that there aren't anybody around who could harm you. The problem with OCD is that checking mechanism is hyperactive. It not so much that it misfires, it overfires. And so while most of us will cater to a fear, and then once we have addressed the fear and know that it's no longer there, we move on to something else. What happens to the OCD sufferer is that they are stuck in this infinite loop of checking and rechecking and rechecking. Now, in that sense, so to link back to your idea of, an irrational phobia, the reality is that some of these OCD manifestations are quite insane. So, for example, oftentimes women who suffer from OCD will have what's called ruminative thinking. It's a form of OCD where there's this intrusive thought that keeps going in their head over and over again. And so they are convinced that what happens if I now go get a knife from the kitchen and stab my newborn? And so they're constantly ruminating about this fear of causing harm to their child. Now, of course, that in itself is irrational because the reality is they're not going to do that. But what's basically happening is you're taking a very adaptive mechanism, which is parental investment, which is the relationship between mother and child, and somehow in this case it is misfiring. So in that sense, it might fit your question of something that's really irrational, because most women who suffer from this type of ruminative thinking are actually never going to harm their child. Does that answer you?
I have to admit, I absolutely love the way that you explain things. You are obviously very well educated. Yeah. So when exactly did you figure out that you didn't actually want to work for a living?
Damn.
It's funny you say this because my family, but in all seriousness, I work something like 18 hours per day. But of course, because it seems as though I'm not always going to an office 9 to 5, right? I'm sitting at a cafe on my laptop, right? Or I'm up till 4 in the morning working, but then I wake up later. And so my family, not my family, meaning my wife, but my nuclear family, my parents and my siblings, whenever I would say, oh, I've got to go to work, they would always sort of sarcastically reply, oh, so which round of cafes are you doing today, right? Because somehow they were under the impression that, GAD lived this bohemian style where he just sort of went from cafe to cafe, chatted with people. And I would always tell them, how do you think those books get written and those papers get written? Like magically, right? But to them, the fact that I wasn't sort of clocking in some physical space, right? 9 to 5, where there's a break to do something, just seemed too bohemian to them. So in a sense, what you're saying, they might agree with you.
Nice.
It's so hard to imagine you in a coffee shop like all the hipsters trying to write a screenplay, except actually accomplishing something.
I can actually totally appreciate what you do. I work a regular job and I do this, and if I could just do this, I would much rather do that. Labor is for suckers without anything or any way to express it properly, and I think you do a great job of that. I'm gonna wrap it up with one more question, and then I'll pass it on to Drew.
Sure.
Regarding earlier about consumption.
Yes.
So how exactly do people consume God or an idea of God, and how does that maybe relate to their evolutionary psychology?
Right. So I guess the second part might be easier to address first. So I argue in one of the chapters of The Consuming Instinct, I've got chapter 8, I titled it maybe slightly provocatively, Marketing Hope by Selling Lies. Excuse me. And so in that chapter, what I basically argue is that there are all sorts of peddlers of hope that actually are very, very successful, precisely because they're so good at catering to some of our most basal Darwinian insecurities. And so, medical quacks do this, right? I mean, imagine if you're somebody who is afflicted with some incurable disease, and everything that medicine has been able to throw at the disease has been unsuccessful. Well, maybe I need to go see the psychic surgeon in the Philippines to solve the problem, right? Or maybe if you put me under a triangle and we chant booga booga, that's going to resolve the problem, right? So medical quacks do that, right? Because you like the booga booga. Self-help gurus do that, right? Self-help books, right? The have sex with a woman and give her orgasm every single time. Well,
Yeah.
we already know that that's a lie because that's not possible, right? Or have monogamous sex for 100 years and let it be as exciting as the first time. That's not going to happen because people habituate to their partners, and it's not as exciting as the first time. And so what self-help gurus and what medical quacks, and I'm coming to your religion.
Just let you
your
know,
question,
Sad, it is possible. Just by the way, go ahead.
it is okay,
Go
well,
ahead.
yep.
Only if you screw them and then wait 100 years and then screw them
Before you
again.
do it again, right?
Almost as exciting as the first time because
Sorry,
it's been
Gad.
so long you forgot.
Go
There
ahead,
you
sorry.
go. But so the third example is, of course, religion. And I argue that religion caters to the granddaddy of Darwinian-based insecurities. It caters to, of course, our existential angst. It caters to our knowledge that the party is going to end at some point. We're all on a death. We all have a death penalty. The clock is ticking, and regrettably, humans are, as far as we know, the only animal that is aware of its eventual demise. And so, while if I have high cholesterol, I go to see my physician, and he gives me Lipitor, and there you go, my cholesterol is resolved. There is no pill for resolving mortality, except there is this one pill called religion. If I drink this religion pill or this religion juice, I could be reunited with my favorite dog, Fido. I could see my grandparents again. I will be reunited with my preferred deity. And so it's very easy to then believe in the narrative. If anything, I argue that it takes somebody to be maladaptively honest to not believe. It is so profoundly more comforting to believe than to not believe.
But
And
it's
so
I can agree because that it's the religion pill though that it's so hard to swallow. Like I can't just I guess it's lying to yourself.
yeah.
Are you willing to lie to others is one thing, but if you're truly willing to lie to yourself about it is a totally different issue.
Which, by the way, and I'm not sure if you've ever heard me speak about this, there is a fantastic evolutionary argument for why people are so adept at self-deception. Have you ever heard me talk about this?
I have indeed. But
I have, but
maybe there might be.
Okay, maybe some of the. Okay, so let me.
I'm trying to be nice to the. We still have two more guys that need to ask questions. So if you can give us like the summary edition,
Short version. Basically, the idea is, this is Robert Trivers who proposed this. Basically, the idea is that if you're going to try to manipulate others who are otherwise always looking at your face and your nonverbal cues to see if you're lying, the way that you could solve this problem is by first lying to yourself. Because by lying to yourself, then you shut off those cues that would otherwise be advertising the fact that you're being duplicitous. So if I want to lie to you well, I first make sure that I lie to myself, and then I could hopefully successfully lie to you. There you go. How's that for 30 seconds?
Does that go down the rabbit hole, though?
I love
It does,
you
right?
every word you speak. Put shit together so succinctly, and that is fucking proof right there. I want to thank you one more time on behalf of the Skeptic Fence Show and myself. This has been one of my favorite, not to shit on our other guests or anything, but you've been one that I've really looked forward to. I thought about, I have a bunch more questions that obviously we don't have time for, but I thought about this for like the last 4 or 5 days, what I would like to ask you. So I really do appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. You're very kind.
You're spread thin, but I'm going to pass you on to Drew now. I'm sure he's got some awesome. I'm sure his questions are just as awesome as mine were.
real quick,
Jesus.
Drew. Gad, if you have no problem with us running over a few minutes,
No problem.
Okay,
Don't worry
good.
about it.
So we got a little time because I got some viewer submissions. But go ahead, Drew. Have at it, buddy.
Awesome. Yeah, there's so much I want to ask. I want to kind of maybe go back just a little bit to what Joe was kind of started this whole thing off with political correctness.
Yes,
Because
sir.
I saw you on the Rubin Report with Dave, and the two of you touched on this quite a bit. And in my opinion, how political correctness just absolutely neuters conversations.
Yes.
And I was kind of curious, what are your thoughts on this kind of going into the future?
Well, I'm starting to see a pushback from the right people. What I mean by the right people, from people who otherwise consider themselves and are known as liberals, who are starting to stand up and say, enough. The pendulum has gone too far one way, and we've got to stir back the ship correctly. And I think that's exactly what the whole purpose of the Rubin Report is to create a forum for people like, I was the first guest, and I think Sam Harris was on, and Majid Nawaz was on, and I'm sure he'll have other people of similar ilk, is to bring people who are known as liberals, who are known as progressive, true progressives, and demonstrate that here we are, we can be perfectly liberal, believe in liberal values, and yet we're not stifled or shackled by this insane political correctness that has really done a number on, certainly university discourse for the past, 20, 30 years. Nowhere do you see that more. I mean, if you guys think that you're exposed to political correctness, you really need to walk the daily walk that I do in the university. This is really sort of political correctness 101, and it's central. It's horrifying, right? I mean, there's almost nothing that you could say that doesn't offend someone. And people have said to me, so how are you able to survive in that environment? And I guess I'm fortunate enough that I'm endowed with the type of personality, maybe the type of irreverence, whereby I simply cannot bear departure from truth, right? I mean, I view my job as a scientist and as a public intellectual to pursue truth wherever that may be. I'm offended if you tell me to keep quiet because it might offend someone, right? That offends me.
Absolutely.
And so, therefore, that's it.
So wait a second. Are you technically a victim of political correctness?
No, I'm not a victim of it. I mean, I could have been a victim if I kept my mouth shut. If I were somebody who succumbed to those pressures. People ask me, well, I mean, don't you find it dangerous that you appear on all these shows and you've become quite known and there's going to be blood? And the reality is, I think that I've probably suffered some professional consequences. As a matter of fact, I know for a fact that there's been a few instances where I could have had these huge professorships where some feathers were ruffled. But the reality is, I then would feel as though I am selling myself short, and more importantly, selling short the truth if I kept my mouth shut. Right? What allowed me to be successful is precisely the traits that other people say is what's going to bring my downfall. Right? I mean, you can't have one and not the other. Right? So
it's goddamn liberal professors. That's what it is.
But
so there you go.
Yeah, but the thing is like what I don't get is when you go to a university, isn't that where you should be able to criticize ideology and ideas? And I just don't. I don't
It's
think
amazing.
It is amazing.
Joe doesn't know because he never went.
All right.
I'm pretty successful, so I'm fine.
No,
Go ahead, Drew. I'm sorry.
changed quite a bit.
He probably makes the most money out of everyone in this fucking room right now. Really,
Bill Gates never finished his undergrad, right?
There you go. Bingo.
You don't have to finish school to be smart, but it does. That's not always the way it goes.
Yes. By the way, before we go back to you, Drew, just a very quick sort of tangent. There's a guy at my university who started his undergrad something like in his 60s, then started his master's, I think when he was something like 75, and then finished his PhD when he was 91. So
Wow.
by that measure, Joe, you're a fetus. You're not even you're not quite out of the womb. So you still have many more years before you could finish your PhD.
There you go.
hang
So I
in
have
there, buddy.
time.
There's something to shoot for. A master's
go.
at in your 90s. Wow, mad respect to that guy. Yeah.
There's a lot of respect there.
You spoke a little bit earlier, and I know you've spoken before about cultural relativism
Yes.
and how it's used by especially liberals in the West. And I guess as an example of this would be something. How can we condemn ISIS killing people when the American military has killed civilians in situations and stuff? I was kind of hoping you could talk a little bit more on cultural relativism.
Yeah. So cultural relativism really comes from the idea that you can't really study any human universals. There are no such things as absolute. There are no universal truths. There is no indelible human nature. Every single culture has to be studied within its idiosyncratic reality. And that's the original context where the term cultural relativism came in. It was actually developed by an anthropologist named Franz Boas, and then he trained several generations of future anthropologists, all of whom went around trying to dismantle the idea that there is such a thing as a universal human nature, right? And now, so an offshoot of cultural relativism, the idea that all cultures are relative and every culture is different and you cannot compare them and so on, is moral relativism. And so, and people mistake the two, but they're not quite the same. Moral relativism is basically the idea that, there are no absolute deontological truth. There's no absolute ethics. There's no absolute right or wrong. Everything has to be judged within the idiosyncratic narrative of that particular culture. And I'll give you a great example, not mine, but this is from Sam Harris. He tells an amazing story where he was interacting in some venue with a bioethicist who sat on the president of the United States commission on bioethics, right? So this is somebody who basically advises the president of the free world about ethics. And she was quite the moral relativist. And so at one point he challenged her and said, I mean, do you think, for example, if I told you of a culture where in their religious narrative it says, I might miss some of the details here, but every third child's eyes have to be gouged out to satisfy the God. Is this something that you would be willing to stand up and say is morally wrong, or it depends? And she said, no, if this is their narrative, if this is their religious reality, then who am I to judge the fact that you gouge out the eyes of every third child? So when somebody who is a professional bioethicist is unwilling to make a definitive statement about that reality, well, she's lost her moral compass.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I guess we are getting kind of close on time, and we have one more guy to talk here. I wanted to. There was a quote you had at the end of one of your videos that I watched recently, and it was your quote was, "Slowly we inch towards the abyss of lunacy." Yes. And I thought that, I was like, that is just a fucking awesome quote. It perfectly mirrors kind of my own feelings regarding the ideas that we're talking about. This regressive label is very fitting. And I just wanted to thank you for your time. I'm going to pass you on to Paul here.
Thank you so much, Drew. Good talking to you.
Mm-hmm. All right, cool. Glad to be able to ask a few questions here. I've been a fan of your videos since towards the start of when you started putting videos on YouTube, and we're promoting them on Twitter.
It was your
and I think I shared with the guys here because what you do with evolutionary psychology, it's very interesting, fascinating work.
Thank you so much.
So I wanted to ask you, what is in your opinion, how big of a problem is the regressive line of thinking, and how much is it affecting academia here in the United States alone?
I mean, it's hugely affecting it, and that, look, and I've discussed this, I don't think it was on Rubin Report, maybe it was with Joe Rogan. I've discussed a study, this is not my own study, I was summarizing somebody else's work, where they looked at the political affiliations of university professors, whether they're Democrats or Republican. Now, I understand that being Democrat is not the same as being a regressive leftist, but certainly the regressive leftists are likely to be Democrats. And so what this study looked at is what's the distribution of Republicans versus Democrats within academia. And the numbers were astonishing. I mean, it was something across departments. It was something like, if I'm not mistaken, 5-1. But in some fields like sociology and women's studies and the humanities and all this kind of stuff, it could be up as much as 44-1, right? I mean, for every one Republican professor, there are 44 Democrats, of which many of them, especially in those types of fields, are going to be subscribers to the regressive leftist, BS. And so the problem there is that you have these, impressionable minds called students who are there to be exposed to, multiple positions, and they're not being exposed to that. And so they come out perfectly indoctrinated, and then you end up having exactly what we have today in the greater society, where everybody apes exactly the same positions. Now, somebody might say, but what are you talking about? I mean, the Democrats are simply the enlightened ones, right? I mean, Republicans are a bunch of evolution-denying hacks, right? Well, look, when it comes to evolution, for example, yes, I would say Republicans are much more likely to be denying of that basic scientific truth than Democrats. But when it comes to issues like fiscal policy, should we have the death penalty or not? What should be our foreign policy? Is affirmative action a good thing or not? These are not scientific truths. These are not 1 + 1 = 2. You could have completely different perspectives, and you're potentially right. And for those types of issues that you would be exposed to in a sociology class and an economics class and a women's studies class, you should have a greater representation from multiple political, from all the full political spectrum, but you don't. And so you get students who then create this massive echo chamber, and it's very bad. So it's very dangerous because you end up exactly with the types of situations that guys like Rubin and myself and Harris are trying to remedy.
It is a massive echo chamber, no doubt.
What? I didn't hear. What? You.
So-
Were. Say.
All right, stop it now.
All right,
The irony of all of us agreeing on the same show about other people have an echo chamber. Got to point out the irony real quick.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Paul.
I wanted to ask
And
you
you all agree at how beautiful my eyes are, so that's another form of echo
Yeah,
chamber.
That's true.
They are shining.
That
like
is true.
stars.
They are kind of. I don't know. They are kind of.
Guys like that, I wouldn't wear sunglasses.
I don't know. It's hard to watch. It's hard to look at the screen directly because I kind of feel like you're raping me every time I look at you with those beautiful eyes.
Damn.
Visual rape.
The
Male
douche.
gaze.
Right, visual rape. Yeah, I was raped when that stupid video. Sorry. Why do you think there's for the regressive everything? Why do you think there's such a need to blame everything on history and blame everything on stuff that have happened in the past to as a reason for why so explain away acts now, like say that a person may have done some type of criminal act, but it's okay because in the past he's been historically oppressed, etc., etc. Why is there such a need for that now?
So because they have a narrative that they have to absolutely adhere to and defend at all costs. So for example, if the narrative is Islam is peace, right? And there is absolutely no possible amount of empirical evidence that I can offer to dissuade you from your position that Islam is peace. And so then we've got all sorts of global mayhem happening around the world that might suggest that for some people, they seem to not think that Islam is peace, and they seem to be blowing up all sorts of things because of their religious adherence. And so the regressive comes along and has to explain that away. And so we've got, for example, the Russell Brand effect, and I did a YouTube video on that, where he basically lists all of the different reasons that explain why people from all over the West are joining ISIS. And here are some of the reasons he explains: alienation, the 2007-2008 financial crisis, evil capitalism. All of these factors were the reason why people are joining ISIS. It had absolutely nothing to do with their religious fervor. But to take your example of sort of regressing back in history, there's a game that I coined, which I called, maybe you've seen this video also, which I called the 6 Degrees of Noam Chomsky Thinking. Are you familiar with that game?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
please do explain it.
yeah. So basically, the way the game works, it's a take on 6 degrees of separation, right? The idea that you could link any two people in the world through 6 causal people, nodes. Basically, I argue that for every calamity around the world, so for example, a frog has just died in the Amazon. Can you, in 6 causal steps or fewer, link it to the U.S. military-industrial complex, right? And this is exactly what your question was, Paul, right? I mean, you find the villain, in this case, the U.S. military-industrial complex, and then you unfold back in history until you say, aha, you see, the U.S. dropped 2 bombs on Japan in 1945, and that's the starting point that led to some future event 70 years later. It's because they have to adhere to the narrative, and so they're going to fudge history in every way they can so that they can protect that narrative. It's propaganda, basically. It's propaganda 101.
Yeah, so pretty much, I don't mean to interrupt,
Yeah.
but pretty much you're going back to your own starting point, the starting point that is most convenient for your narrative.
Exactly. And actually, I actually, again, being somebody who I guess you know now is quite adept at satire,
Yeah.
I said, look,
Mhm.
what we need to do is if we really want to blame ISIS, we need to go back to Homo erectus when they, walked out of Africa. Because if those bastard ancestors had not walked out of Africa, you'd never have had ISIS. So why are you blaming the US and so on? You really have to unfold history to those original bastards in our evolutionary history that had the gall to step out of Africa. They're the guys that we should be
That's
blaming.
a great analogy. I love it.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It,
It's
it is,
awesome.
it is, but at the same time, you can't always go back to like the start of a problem to address it currently. I mean, there is a difference between like, well, like you were saying with ISIS or whatever, like how they started or whatever, and now how, if we're leaving weapons behind or some shit, that how that could help them in the long
Yes.
run, or how just randomly drone striking and shit will get people to more than likely, if you kill one of their family members,
Right.
more than likely you have to accept those small details, but definitely the source of the problem is an issue and needs to be addressed. People don't, you shouldn't pretend like ISIS just happened a year ago or some shit. That would be
But
absolutely
but
stupid.
It's been going on
yes,
since the
but
7th century. God.
you're underestimating people's capacity for stupidity and delusional thinking. I mean, I've personally had interactions with people where I've challenged them, where I said, explain to me how the beheadings of some Yazidi woman or gang rapes is tied to Israel. And boy, could they come up with
Oh, yeah.
explanations, right? I mean, they could link the beheading of some Thai person in Thailand by some Islamic extremist in Thailand to the existence of Israel, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
it means the hallucinatory capabilities of these folks in order to protect their favorite narrative is truly limitless.
I totally
Yeah.
agree. You must have missed the Cooter report because I covered a guy who tied like a stock market crash to buying potato soup. So
Go ahead, Paul. One more. And then we'll get on with the viewer
Right.
submissions.
Now, by the way, is one of
Yeah, go ahead.
you guys the dark? Joe, what is the guy you said that is it?
Oh, like I was telling, Dark Matter. I mentioned your channel to GAD SAD here that makes the
Now,
cartoons.
which one is that? Which one of
He's
you
in
is that?
he's in here. No, he's in the chat room.
he's in the chat.
He's
He's
in the
not.
Because I just went to see his numbers, and I told Joe, how does somebody get 400,000 subscribers? I mean, it makes.
Maybe
I'm not envious of anybody, but I have to admit I'm envious of those metrics.
well, if
If you're terribly envious, you might want to stick around for the after show because he'll be a part of it, and
Yeah,
maybe
he'll be a
he can
part of it,
explain
yeah.
to you.
Yeah, he'll be part of it. Paul, one more question. I got some viewer submissions, and then we'll wrap it up. And Gad, of course, you're more than welcome to think about coming on the after show. I'm sure Dark Matter will be there, and you can pick his brain on how he did it. So go ahead, Paul. One more.
And I'll give you this: Dark Matter's a smart guy. He might
he
be
is.
bald, but he's
He
smart.
might be.
Right.
Go ahead, Paul.
Okay, so just one last question I want
Sure.
to ask you, since you're well versed on the regressive / I guess the SJWs or what do you want to call them. A lot of people say that calling them cultural Marxists is a conspiracy theory by the right to dismiss them. But it seems that Collins did base a lot of her work on Marx's economic theory. So would it be proper to call them that, or is that is there something better to?
You mean
Categorize
is
them
it
as.
proper to call JWs as cultural Marxists? Is that the question?
Yes.
Yeah. So look, I would say that a lot of them would have that political bent, but not necessarily all of them. But I mean, so I think it would be a slight misnomer to assume that those two terms are synonymous. So in other words, yes, most are likely to be anti-capitalist and capitalism is the root of all problems, and I wear a Che Guevara shirt and so on. So in that sense, they're likely to be Marxists and cultural Marxists in particular. But I wouldn't feel that it is correct to assume that the two terms are synonymous.
Oh, great. Thank you for the clarifying that, because
Sure.
I don't think that all of them are, but certainly many of them do have this anti-capitalist bent, I guess.
Exactly.
And thank you very much for.
Oh, sure.
Go on,
My
sorry.
pleasure. No, I was just going to say, yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for answering the questions, God. I'm going to pass it back to Joe because he has a few viewer submissions.
Shoot.
Thanks, Paul. Gad, I got two viewer submissions here. One is from Luca DeBon. He asked, or she asked, I have a lot of theists. I've had a lot of theists claim that without a God, one cannot account for altruism. I have my own answer to this question, but what does evolutionary behavioral science have to say on why people behave altruistically?
Oh my goodness. Very good question, but profoundly incorrect from the perspective of the people who say that, without God, there's no altruism. As a matter of fact, I propose that there are four basal Darwinian drives when it comes to most of the things that we do. One of which is called reciprocal altruism. So evolutionary scientists have spent quite a bit of time definitely showing how altruism evolves. And let me give you sort of the 2-minute version. Excuse me. So if you look at, why would I jump into the river to save my brothers? Because if all I care about is my own survival, then it makes no evolutionary sense for me to risk myself, let alone dying, to save my brother. But then if you recognize that evolution works at the level of the genes, then saving 3 of my brothers, all of whom are on average, they share 50% of their genes with me, then even if I were to die, it makes evolutionary sense. Now that's called kin selection, right? This explains altruism to kin. But now the more general problem is, why would I ever jump and save Joe? Joe and I are not biologically related, right? Why would I jump in and save a complete stranger? Why would I ever behave altruistically to non-kin? And there the argument stems from the fact that in social species, reciprocity is an adaptive strategy. So if you look at, say, various primates where they literally, you scratch my back, I scratch yours, right? They engage in reciprocal grooming, right? Now that's a very, very important mechanism because it actually helps their survival, right? It removes being exposed to otherwise dangerous, critters and parasites, right? And so in the context of humans, one of the arguments for how reciprocity and reciprocal altruism would have evolved is, look, if we're walking through the savannah, Joe's family and mine, we're not biologically related, but we strike up an insurance policy that basically says, look, the next time that you bring down big game, would you mind sharing it with my family, under the assumption that in the future, when your family will be starving and I bring down the game, I'll share it with you. And so for social species, the way that you oil the bonds of affiliation is through these forms of altruistic acts of reciprocity. And so the literature, the scientific literature on altruism is profoundly clear, and none of it requires a celestial dictator, to use the term of Hitchens.
And to maybe add on to your point, which was very thought out and it's really hard to add on to, but even like when the alpha male of a lion pride is done eating, he steps away and everyone else gets to eat,
Exactly.
Even at the most basic levels, altruism exists.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And you especially find it, altruism is much more likely to be found in social species than in non-social species, precisely for the reasons that I mentioned. And I'll just mention one other thing. Sure. For reciprocity to evolve, there needs to be what is known as repeat interactions, right? In other words, if I give you the meat when I bring it down, but then I never stand the chance of ever running into you again, then I could never benefit from the reciprocal arrangement because you'll never reciprocate to me. So as long as there is repeat interactions and the capacity to recognize one another, then there are very good reasons for altruism to evolve between us.
Wow.
And that's why I don't give change to bums.
Damn. One last question, we'll head over to the after show, and this one is from Devin Tracy. He asked, you've seen the term regressive rise out and take hold within the true liberal community. What other terms or memes would you like to see gain traction so as to raise awareness about a certain idea?
Right. So, to stay within the same topic, I would say pseudo-liberal or faux liberal, right, is another way to powerfully spread a meme, right? In other words, those who call themselves liberal but who are otherwise regressives are actually faux liberals, right? They're pseudo liberals.
Yeah.
Because the true liberal does believe that women have a right to have clitorises, right? And if you don't stand up for women's rights to have their own clitoris, then you are a pseudo liberal, you're a faux liberal. So that's, I think, another way to add to the sort of lexicon to try to isolate these idiots.
Pretty sure you just won over the entire crowd with women have the right to have clitorises. That might be the the only thing I can think of where more people might agree is orgasms are good, but it's along the same lines.
Well, by the way, it's very difficult to have an orgasm without one of those little things called the clitoris.
Right.
So true. All right, guys. Yeah, we're out of here. We're gonna go head over to the after show. Guys, please check out GAD SAAD. I got the social media links down below. I will add them in the video description when this video comes out tomorrow. GAD, thank you very much, sir. It was a fun time with you tonight,
Very much
man.
so.
We do
Thank
appreciate
you,
it.
guys. Really enjoyed it.
You're more than welcome to hang.
I encourage everybody to give their money to this guy as
Yeah,
soon as they give money to us first.
Thank
He
you.
does.
So-
He does fantastic work.
Oh, and
there.
I should say, by the way, thank you. I want to say it publicly so people know. Thank you for your generous contribution to my Patreon fund. That was very nice.
You're
of you guys. I
welcome.
really
You
appreciate it.
definitely
welcome.
deserve it. I think
Yeah.
I'll become a patron of yours after this show. I love your style, your delivery. You're educated and like at ease, you know,
Thank you.
and
You're very
it
kind.
really comes across well. Yeah, I don't think I've ever met any of the people that I respect that were like, fuck that GAD guy. Like, you know, you
Yeah.
come across well to everybody, so we really do appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we
You're
definitely
very, very
much
kind.
so. And
I'm
please
very
go check
touched.
out his YouTube channel and check out the Sad Truth. I'm like, that's an awesome series you got going on. I
Yeah,
love it.
it is. I mean, ever since a teenager, I've always wondered about the biological reasons behind people's actions, and what he does is fantastic work explaining it.
Yeah, exactly. And before we end the show, I do like to call out new patrons on our Patreon site before we end the show. Stabbers, thank you very much. $5 per show. Thank you for your pledge to our channel here. And GAD, you're more than welcome to hang out for the after show for a little bit. We're gonna have Dark Matter on. I think Non-Stamp Collector might be in here a little bit too.
We would really appreciate it, and they're bigger company.
Yeah,
So-
we're gonna take a 5-minute break. So you have
I'll
some
hang
time.
around for a few minutes if you'd
Okay,
like.
cool. Yeah, we're gonna take a 5-minute break
Thank you.
so we can get up, exercise our legs, grab a drink, go to the bathroom, whatever. So figure about 5 or 6 minutes. We'll be right back with GAD SAAD on the after show with Dark
I
Matter.
called
and maybe
dibs on first question.
Nah,
We
okay.
come back.
It's a fun time. So, guys, we'll be right back. And please, seriously, go support GAD SAAD on his social media. He's an excellent, awesome, intelligent dude. Like that's why I say he's a fresh breath of intelligence on social
Yeah, and
media.
he's
awesome.
spectacular on Twitter as well.
Yes, he is. Yes. He
Oh,
is.
yes.
Baldwin brother I ever saw.
Yep, go check him out on Twitter, Facebook, and also YouTube. GAD, we'll be right back with you. And guys, we'll be right back with the after show. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Cheers.